but that's okay. We have a quorum. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Washington State Autonomous Vehicle Work Group Executive Committee meeting for September 28th, 2022. For the record, we do have a quorum, and we'll go ahead and do introductions. But before we start introductions, I'd like to say a few words about a former committee member. So I'm sure most of you already know that we lost a member of our committee recently. Tom Alberg, who represented ACES Northwest, passed away on August 5th. Many have said, and I found this to be true as well, Tom was a quiet man, often shying away from the limelight so that those he was mentoring could be recognized for their accomplishments. I met Tom in September of 2016 when I was mayor of Sunnyside. He came to speak at our one-day unmanned aerial systems symposium. I was immediately impressed by Tom. Up until that point, he was the only person who didn't look at me like I was from Mars when I talked about my vision for an eVTOL taxi service here in Yakima Valley. I was genuinely excited to hear Tom was joining the AV Work Group Exec Committee in 2018 and thoroughly enjoyed working with him over the last few years. Although Tom had many roles and major milestones in his career, including co-founding the Madrona Venture Group in 1995 and serving 23 years on the Amazon Board of Directors, he still found time to serve on our committee and provide us with his years of wisdom and experience. I think my favorite quote from Tom was when he was asked about the most difficult part of his job at Madrona, and he responded, "Measuring my enthusiasm for every idea I hear. There are a lot of exciting ideas out there." The state of Washington is grateful for his generosity and time and thought. And as you know, Tom represented ACES Northwest on our committee, and I'm happy to announce that Bruce Agnew has generously offered to step into that role. Bruce, would you like to say a few words?
Sure, Jim. That was a very touching comment about Tom. We miss him dearly. As you mentioned, he was one of the original investors in Amazon, and he also served, he had a variety of civic ventures, but he also served on the Challenge Seattle board. And I recall back in 2017, he felt that the region needed to pay more attention to the role that technology could play in public good for transportation. And in fact, Madrona actually commissioned a couple of studies in terms of looking at autonomous vehicle operations on Interstate 5. And that's why he formed ACES. And Brian Misteli, our other co-chair, is a member of the committee. And I'm happy to stand in for Tom, although there is no stand-in for Tom. We will miss him dearly. And he really looked at this committee as important in terms of setting policy. So I'm glad we can continue to work with you all.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I appreciate that. And I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, we'll go ahead and do introductions. Markel.
All right, so I'm going to run through roll call. And if you could just give me a verbal acknowledgement if you are present. So Chair Jim Ristici.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Shiv Batra.
Here.
Senator Joe Nguyen. Senator Mona Das. Senator Curtis King. Senator Ann Rivers. Representative Sharon Shoemake. Representative Shelley Kloba.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Representative Mary Dye. Representative Matt Banky. Dennis Bozeman, representing WSP for Chief John Batiste.
I'm here.
Scott Kipper, representing OIC for Mike Kreidler.
Here.
Teresa Bernstein.
Hi, Markel. It's Bo. I'm standing in for Teresa today with Department of Licensing.
All right. Ted Bailey, representing WashDOT for Roger Millar.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Debbie Driver. Allison Drake, representing L&I for Joel Sachs.
Here.
Caitlin Jekyll, representing ESD for Cami Feek.
I'm here, thanks.
Laura Johnson,
I'm here.
Pam Pancock, representing Traffic Safety Commission,
Here.
Katie Ruckel, representing WATEC for Bill Kehoe,
Here.
Dr. Yin Hai Wang,
I'm here. Good morning.
Justin Layton,
Present.
representative for City of Seattle. Do we have anyone on the line?
Markel, Armand Shabazian is on, but I don't think he's got a participation link and he's in and out. So he and I are messaging and we'll make sure he's got a link to be able to participate when he can.
Okay, and are they representing City of Seattle?
Yes.
Fabulous. Kurt Augustine,
I'm here.
Brenda Wiest. And I do believe Brenda will be joining us at noon. Bruce Agnew,
Here.
Todd O'Brien,
Here.
Jessica Ramirez, Brian Mistely,
Here.
Kelly Just, representing AAA for Laura Ray,
I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Bryce Yaden,
I'm here.
Katie Marshall, proxy for Ariel Wolf. They may not have the join link yet. Steve Gordon,
Here.
Brent Ludeman, representing Waymo for Aiden Ellie Sullivan.
Here.
Anna Zevarts,
Here.
all right. Did I miss anyone? All right. Well, we have 24 of 35 executive members present, so we have a quorum, Chair.
Thank you so much, Markel. Okay, moving on. Next item on the agenda is item 2, Department of Licensing Implementation of AV legislation, HB 2676. We have 3 speakers. We have Bo Perschbacher, Legislative and Policy Director, Jill Johnson, Legislative and Special Project Manager, and Daniel Hagan, Autonomous Vehicle Program Specialist, all from the Department of Licensing. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jill and Daniel, are you on? Are you able to?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just, oh, there you are. Perfect.
I'm going to share my screen as well.
Get the slides pulled up. Well, I think Jill's going to be doing most of this presentation, but I did want to just take a moment and, remind folks that it's been several years since 2676 passed. So with it taking effect just around the corner here with October 1st, we thought it would be a good opportunity in talking with REMA to remind everybody about those new requirements. And we've been talking with some of the companies that are present in Washington as well. If they, they have any questions, I just would remind folks that, in addition to the presentation, if you always want to reach out to Jill, I, or Daniel about any follow-up you have or things you need clarification, we're always happy to talk about it and do what we can to make that as easy as possible for folks. So I think with that, Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Bo. Are you guys able to see my screen? Slideshow?
Yes, we are able to
Okay.
see your screen.
Great. Thank you. All right. And as Bo alluded to, so we're going to be doing just a brief presentation on the implementation of engrossed substitute House Bill 2676, which passed the legislature in the 2020 session. So let me go to the next screen. So just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So we'll just kind of do just a really brief bit on the current AV requirements. So that's both from statute as well as the executive order. And then the upcoming requirements from this bill 2676 that go into effect on Saturday, October 1st, as well as some administrative actions and future plans for DOL. So the current AV requirements, so it's kind of a mix of both state statutes, so RCW 4692010, as well as the executive order 02 from 2020 or 2017, apologies. So the current requirements are you complete a self-certification form, which can be found on our website, dol.wa.gov. It's just a one-page form right now, and it just asks for current contact information about where you're going to be testing, as well as it will have some new features coming up soon with the new implementation as well. And then proof of insurance. This was a new part of the statute as well from 2676. This requires testing entities to maintain an umbrella liability insurance policy that covers at least $5 million in AV related damages. So this was codified into RCW 4630050, as well as referenced in the above statute. And for this part, we don't require them to send us the entire policy. Usually those are very lengthy. We just require them to send us kind of the cover sheet to show the proof of policy. And then I thought this was important to include that testing can be performed with or without a human operator present. So this was part of the Executive Order 1702, which I think makes us unique here. So those are the current AV requirements all the way up till Friday. And then this is just kind of a little brief thing on the self-certification form. So this is what you would find if you clicked into our website. So it's pretty high level. We don't require a lot as of right now, and just mostly contact information should we have questions, as well as that insurance policy. So this can be received electronically or by paper. Most have been sending them electronically. We maintain these records on hand at DOL and kind of into perpetuity because there's no retention schedule on them, it seems like. And then we also keep that proof of insurance along with it. And additionally, we also maintain a list of the current self-certified companies on our website. So if you go to dol.wa.gov, there's a web page under autonomous vehicles. If you just search that, and it lists the 3 companies on there, as well as instructions on how to submit this self-certification form. All right, so the upcoming requirements from Engrossed Substitute House Bill 2676, so effective on Saturday, October 1st, to test on roadways, testing entities must supply DOL with the following information. So this is in addition to what they were currently giving us, they will now have to give us a little bit more information. So more contact information, those planned testing locations, vehicle identification number, so the VIN. If there's no VIN, then just a unique identifier for the vehicle itself, as well as that proof of insurance. So that way we'll be including all this on our new form. We're just basically upgrading our current form to include all these new pieces. Additionally, testing entities must annually report to DOL any AV related vehicle collisions or moving violations that occur during testing on a public roadway. They have to do this by February each year. So obviously starting in October, we won't probably get a whole lot of anything until this next February in 2023. All right, and additionally, testing entities must provide 14 to 60 days notice to the applicable law enforcement agencies prior to testing on a public roadway. So this could be a local jurisdiction, so it could be city of Yakima or wherever they're planning on testing, or it could be WSP if they are planning on being on the highway. And so it can be no less than 14 days and no more than 60 days in advance. And then part of the bill also requires DOL to provide public access to the materials that the self-certification companies provide to us. So we will maintain all the information at DOL, and we will, upon request, be able to provide that public access to it. And additionally, DOL must summarize and report this information from the testing entities to the legislature on an annual basis. So this December will be the first report that we submit to the legislature. Because of the effective date in October and then submitting it in December, there probably won't be a whole lot to this first report, but nonetheless, this will be the first one. All right, and then future administrative actions. So this is what we're working on right now to get ready for this. So updates to our self-certification form that I alluded to are in progress right now, and that form will be ready in hopefully just a few days. And then the creation of a new annual incident reporting form is also in progress. So this will be a standalone form apart from the self-certification form that companies can, should there be a collision or moving violation, they would fill this out and submit it back to the department. These first annual reports will be due in February 2023, covering calendar year 22. And kind of probably the most fun part for Bo and I is that DOL has hired an additional staff member to help administer all these requirements and the self-certification program. So hopefully Daniel was able to get on. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself real quick? And if not, he was kind of having some tech issues. If not, I can introduce him as well. So Daniel will be working in our driver and vehicle records unit as the program specialist for autonomous vehicles. So he will help us with all kinds of research and reporting and help administer the self-certification program so that Bo and I don't have to cover everything these days at DOL, which is exciting. So the funding from 2676 did allow for us to hire Daniel in that capacity, which is very exciting. So that's kind of the end of my piece. You guys have any questions, you're welcome to send them back through Bo or myself or through our autonomous vehicle inbox that we have.
Well, I'll ask if there are any questions.
Hello, I think my microphone is finally working.
Oh,
Just had to give
Daniel,
it a
yeah,
good old
There you are.
reboot there. It just really doesn't seem to like these meetings. I apologize. I'm Daniel. I am the new autonomous vehicle program specialist. I am, as Jill said, working within our DVR unit to manage, maintain these records, and to stay in contact with these companies to make sure that we're meeting these requirements. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome, Daniel. Other questions or comments? Anything for DOL? Okay, moving on. Thank you
Can I
for your
just-
presentation.
Can I just pop in
Oh,
and say one thing?
Sure.
It's just, as a legislator, it's one thing to have great ideas and work with stakeholders and come up with a product, but to see it launched into the world is really pretty exciting. So thank you for everybody who, at DOL who has been working hard to make that happen. I really appreciate it, and I'm anxious to see, how it lives out there in the world. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kloba. I see Ted Bailey's hand is up. Ted.
Thank you, Chair Restucci. I just had a quick question related to the companies that are currently self-certified. Any anticipated changes to that list, given the requirements to take effect on October 1st? Or is everybody good with the new requirements that's currently listed?
None that I know of. Obviously, the date hasn't passed yet, so we may get some inquiries with these additional requirements. It's not super heavy-handed on the DOL side for the self-certification part, so I don't anticipate anything come Saturday necessarily, but time will tell.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rima.
Yeah, Jill, that was great. And like Representative Kloba said, this is exciting to see something actually happening. So this will be interesting to monitor. Quick question on the proof of insurance. So what kind of proof are you asking for when you ask companies for proof? And then is the department keeping that on file as part of like a file for each company that's been approved for testing?
Great question, Rima. Yeah, so all I have been requiring is the COI, so the coverage of, or the the cover of insurance. So it usually is kind of a cover sheet for a policy. One of the companies did send us the policy once, and I think it was like 30 something odd pages, which as a record keeping agency, we don't necessarily need that. I just need to know that they are covered for that time frame. So usually that cover sheet will show me policy numbers, who the holder is, and that time frame. And so that's all I've been requiring of them.
And then that's kept on file. And then also, with the expiration, are they required to resubmit that? Each
Correct,
time
yeah.
they renew, basically.
Yep, we keep that with their file. So with their self-certification form, any questions that we've gotten from them, any materials they've sent. And then every May, I just go in and just pop them a note and say, hey, it's time to re-up your insurance. And usually we get it, within a matter of days, or I let them know that you either need to send us, your updated coverage, or we will be removing you from the list. And as that's a requirement. So there have been a couple companies that have chosen to just no longer test in Washington. And so they just let me know, and we just remove them from the maintained list.
Thank you. Oh, I see Armand Shabazian. I'm hoping I'm getting it right, from Seattle DOT. You're recognized.
Great, thanks. Yeah, close, very close. I guess building on Rima's question, I am curious if the insurance requirement is just general liability, or if it's like a combined, like let's say they have cybersecurity insurance and general liability, if like the total amount totaling 5 million covers it, or like what specific types of policies are required under the regulations.
That's a great question. Thanks, Armand. So we did work really closely with the Insurance Commission when this passed, so that I, understood, because obviously we're not an insurance agency. So I wanted to better understand what this insurance requirement was and kind of what it should cover. And so it's more of the general liability there. Obviously, if their vehicles get into a collision, they need to be covered in other fashions. So a lot of these companies have been covering a lot more. So I'm sure they have, cyber insurance. They don't need to, submit that to us. But it's that general liability that we do look for.
Thank
Hope
you.
that
Other
answers.
questions or comments? I am not seeing any. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Jim, we seem to have lost your audio.
I'm so sorry. Am I there?
You are now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I was on mute. AB Roadmap to the Future, Key Component Agency Readiness. Scott Shogan, Vice President, WSP USA. Scott, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Just give me a quick second here to share my screen. Good to be with you again today. If you recall from our last meeting, we're now going through the process. We've been at this for a while as a work group, and are now preparing for this roadmap to the future, essentially a legacy document, really looking at what kinds of takeaways can we kind of carry into the future past the sunsetting of this work group, to kind of continue that action into the future for Washington State. So our work group, if you recall, is extending really through 2023 when the work group would sunset. So we're kind of preparing this roadmap for the future and kind of seeking input from you all on these key components one at a time as we kind of work through the process. So our 5 components: agency readiness, testing and pilots, public outreach, safety, and path to deployment. At our last meeting, we covered the topic of public outreach and got some input from you. Today, we want to talk further about agency readiness and really dig into that topic. I think great that we're coming after the DOL presentation here, a great example of moving forward in that direction. So what really are the goals of agency readiness as we kind of think about this roadmap to the future? Really just for agencies, for state agencies and agencies at the local level to adapt as transportation infrastructure really becomes increasingly entwined with these automated vehicles and essentially everything that automation may lead to in terms of transformation in the mobility space. The idea here being that these two things were often very decoupled. They're now coming together, and there's an increased need for awareness across that boundary and action at the agency side to be able to move this forward in a safe deployment manner. Maintaining good relationships across this space is critical to that. And really just simply being organized for innovation, recognizing that changes are happening, and it's important for agencies to be oriented in a way that can recognize change, adapt to change, have the kind of understanding of that change enough to really be able to pivot as an organization. So let's talk about some activities to date, and then we want your feedback on this as well. I just mentioned, and certainly we just heard from the DOL on the self-certification program. Great example of a move in this direction of recognizing the needs of the industry and starting to implement those processes as well. Through this work group process, we've seen some additional activities in terms of adopting policy goals for cooperative automated transportation, or CAT. The policy goals that were adopted a couple of years ago now really kind of guiding the work group strategy as an example of kind of organizing around these concepts. Clarifying the definitions of automated vehicles really around level 4 and level 5. So higher levels of automation, not trying to engage in discussion around some of the lower levels of technologies that are being deployed today, but really focusing on the truly transformational technologies with greater safety implications there as well. And finally, repealing the RCW that included television screen ban. So, again, kind of a legacy provision around a prior time that now really has changed kind of in context as we think about the evolution of vehicles and how vehicles may be used in this automated environment. So with that, I'm going to switch over here and bring us into a Mentimeter poll and just ask for some additional feedback and input on this. What did we miss? What are other things that that your agencies or other groups within the state that you're aware of? What are some of the activities that you all have done that we maybe didn't capture that you think really speak to that move towards agency readiness for AVs? So I think I know you've all been through this drill before. Menti.com, and the code is at the top, 35559550 is the code if you're not able to read that on your screen. But we'll just give this a minute. Would love some input here. So dedicated staff, again, great to hear that from DOL in terms of being able to have some staff allocation towards this. That's huge. So getting some feedback here on importance of testing level 3, not just level 4, level 5, stakeholder meetings. So some good feedback here, just in terms of recognizing need or desire to encourage AV makers to trial in Washington, and what's it going to mean to do that. Having some clarification on responsibility for assignments and roles within organizations, absolutely important roles there, or important actions. Just give this one more minute for any any lingering ones before we move on? All right, looks like we may have gotten it, so appreciate that. Gonna just switch back here quickly. So so with that, just wanted to look ahead. We're really now looking and pivoting to that discussion about what are some of the actions that still need to happen. What do we need to identify and have on that radar to again kind of move in this direction of agency readiness. What may need to be revised or implemented, removed to support regulation around this, just as examples. So let's talk about some of these examples, what that could look like. So we've got kind of a few different topic areas to go through today. Regulation and policy. So examples of what this could look like. So, specifically legislation, changes to the motor vehicle code, could be agency specific policies that you all may have that need to be revisited as we kind of think about changes that are coming. Looking at how well perhaps your agency's policies mesh with federal and local policy is another thing that is evolving over time. And we haven't seen a lot in the federal policy space as much as we perhaps did a few years ago. But certainly this is going to be something that's happening over time, that harmonizing those policies is going to be really important. So, what are some of the goals of visiting these changes? Really aligning overall with state goals. We've talked a lot about climate and resiliency and understanding kind of how AVs are going to potentially drive, or how they could potentially be harnessed to reach some of those state goals. Obviously, safety, mobility as goals as well. And just understanding needs for state policy level with regards to this. So what's that process look like? Understanding, evaluating that existing language, identifying gaps where they do exist, where further clarifications may be needed, developing new or revised policies or statutes through this process, and really defining roles as well. We know, again, this is something that's going to happen over time, and really understanding what's that delineation of roles between what we're going to be hearing from the federal government in this regard versus what really is the role of Washington State, what are the roles of some of your agencies, and what really is going to be deferred at the local level for rules regarding this. So moving on to resources, really getting into how well is your agency resourced to be able to handle some of these changes, not only just in terms of pure staff level, but that knowledge base, really, strengthening the understanding and the expertise within the organization. In developing partnerships across the industry with other agencies to really help facilitate that. In agency, knowledge and expertise in the AV space. By no means is this a suggestion that we need, engineers with, with an understanding of every detail of automated vehicles and what that looks like, but really just understanding what are some of the changes that are happening as a result of AVs. How might those impact your agency, or how might your agency need to pivot to be able to address that, be able to address safe deployment, be able to properly regulate. Having that, that core knowledge within your agency is going to continue to be important. And maintaining that network of collaboration across industry, across the spectrum of public entities as well. So there's obviously a training element to this. There's ongoing collaboration, and clearly that's part of what this work group was established to do. How does that continue on into the future as well? And finally, state resource improvements. So as we think about this, really getting into to actually the physical infrastructure that is delivered in the state, transportation infrastructure, as well as connectivity, broadband technology to support these technologies, kind of understanding and addressing what needs to be developed at the state level or local level to do that. And minimizing negative impacts from those changes, critically important. So a lot of different elements as we think about agency readiness that need to be kind of considered going forward. So so this is kind of, we've identified this framework here of kind of the key areas. We want to, again, take some time to just get some feedback from you on this as well. Bear with me one more minute here. Sorry for the clumsiness of switching back and forth, but we're gonna switch to the next slide here if we can. There we go. So again, just really want your feedback through the Mentimeter to just share your ideas. So obviously, please feel free to type them in. We'd love your input that way. Or certainly if you want to raise your hand and be acknowledged by the chair, be happy to have questions and feedback just as part of a discussion right now too. But what are your other thoughts on kind of key areas that we really need to look to address going into the future for your agency or for the state overall, just in terms of readiness for AVs? I know these free answers are slow, so we'll just give everybody a minute here. Great, starting to see some things come in here, which is great. Assess whether the self-certification model supports scaled commercial deployment. I think a key additional step there, that's great. Coordination with cities as a key element. Again, state-local relationships, so kind of seeing that theme here. So getting into, define agency needs for commercial AV deployment. So kind of thinking beyond this testing phase as a key element, and conducting a pilot using a mass transit model. So gaining kind of that experience as well. Just note, Mr. Chair, I think we've got a hand up.
Armand.
Thank you. I just wanted to drop in a comment about, like we've heard from AV companies that they want to avoid like a patchwork of regulations. So seeing where coordination can happen, like at the state, but also talking with cities where impacts of AVs are more complicated, and also working to create alignment like with neighboring states, because these vehicles often cross borders. And I also just wanted to drop a note as well that we're actually at a conference right now about autonomy, and we've been hearing from trucking companies that they see AV trucking happening on interstates, but that human operation will still be a factor for like first and last mile within dense areas. So I wanted to flag that as an interesting tidbit, and then just close with noting that a lot of AV testing, especially testing that's happening in Seattle, for instance, is actually level 3 testing. And I do have some concern about the requirement switching only to requiring reporting and so on and so forth for level 4 and 5 autonomy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate it. And looks like we're getting in some additional thoughts here as well. Yeah, coordinating with neighboring states. Looks like, municipal government, seeing a lot of that theme. That it's great to see kind of concurrence across that in terms of interaction with local jurisdictions. Assess and plan for equity. Obviously, I know that's been a big theme in our discussions kind of across the timeline of this work group is a really important piece as well. Near-term agency deployment opportunities. Another good one. So kind of seeing the range of, recognizing where we're at right now and some of those priorities, as well as longer term. Highway road signs and lane markers are up to standard. Again, really getting more tactical here. Great input as well. So really good feedback here. We appreciate the interaction. Any other comments? Either you can feel free to continue to enter them in. I'll leave the Menti open in the background, but any other comments that you want to share? Open mic to the group here. Mr. Bailey.
Hey, Scott, great overview. Nice facilitation as always. So I think we should have some more discussion on the scalability of the self-certification model. Because if you assume that the USDOT is not going to put requirements in place until the end of this decade, that means that states and local jurisdictions will have to govern the line between testing and commercial deployment. And if you cross that line, the level of agency expertise or contracted expertise is going to significantly increase. And so it's not an easy question to answer, but definitely from a readiness standpoint, I don't believe we are ready to cross that particular line, because the expertise required to be more hands-on than self-certification is a exponential increase. That's it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Ted. I think that's, I think that's a huge concern. I think that's an area that that certainly everybody wants to look to the federal government, for the role that they're going to take there, just because that is such a huge Rubicon to cross there, and to have an expectation of that at a state level, I think really challenging. So I appreciate that feedback.
I would agree. Representative Kloba.
Well, I am actually wondering if I might be, if Bo Perschbacher and I are on the same wavelength here, but piggybacking on Ted Bailey's comment about moving away from self-certification and actually having, the responsibility of someone in an agency or a contracted entity from an agency being responsible for saying, yes, you can deploy, no, you can't deploy, and based on some set of criteria, that comes along with it some liability issues that I don't think we're prepared yet to resolve, but we absolutely need to be thinking about them.
Absolutely.
Good points.
Thank you.
Bo?
Yeah, I second both those comments. I think exactly, what Ted was saying was, I think we feel like we get out of our depth really quick here, on some of these issues, particularly at DOL. Where you can't administer a standard driving test to an AV, which we're really good at that. We've got lots of experience in that area. But, traditionally, a lot of those things around the vehicle itself have been handled at the federal level. But a side note, I guess, the question I was really curious to hear about is I see a lot of references to commercial deployment. I think that's an issue we've been thinking about, talking with folks a lot about as well. And I guess I was sort of maybe curious just to hear from the industry, how important is that, to you in terms of next steps, in terms of trying to figure out that pathway to commercial deployment, or is, just testing? Is it still all about the testing at this point? I don't know if anyone is comfortable sharing, but would love to hear any feedback there.
Any response from our industry partners?
Bo, Brent Ludeman here. We would love to see a focus on deployment legislation. Whether or not we're ready for that in 2023 is a big question, but that's certainly our focus is, what are the set of regulations and rules and requirements that the states need to have in place in order to get there. So, we're interested in having those conversations. I'm not sure we're quite ready to move forward with legislation, but that's certainly more of our focus than really adjusting the current testing law.
And
Thanks.
hi, this is Kurt. This is Kurt Augustine with the automakers. I would completely agree with the comments that Brent just made. Other states have allowed deployment. It's actually occurring. With some of our members, like Cruise in San Francisco, is actually having driverless taxi services, if you will. So we're again, I strongly associate myself with the remarks that Brent made. Thank you.
So that's super helpful. Thank you both. And I think I'll just sort of say from the licensing perspective, licensing subcommittee, I think, we're very interested in having those discussions and helping facilitate that conversation of what deployment looks like within sort of whatever time frame folks are comfortable. If we know it's a complex issue, and we're sort of, trying to get a sense of sort of what the key things the industry needs to see, or if there's any sense of this is the state that's done it best so far. Because as Kurt mentioned, we are aware of commercial pilots starting to pop up in California, Arizona, some of these areas, and at least based on my conversations, we understand that having that pathway to commercialization, being able to see the sort of the way to get there is important for investment. So just thanks for sharing that, and we remain open to trying to help facilitate those discussions between some of the government actors and the private industry if there's a desire to take that on and try to figure out a way forward everybody can agree with.
Thank you, Bo. Other questions, comments on this item? Back to you, Scott.
Okay, that's actually all I have. Great feedback. Really appreciate the input on this topic, and we'll continue to develop out this roadmap and be back to you at our next meeting with another topic. So, Rima, I see you've got your hand up.
Yep.
Thanks. I just, Scott, if you could just touch on kind of the next step. So we've been getting kind of input on these sections of a report that's going to be built between now and, let's say next spring or summer. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of how we get from today and how we're going to roll this all forward, maybe into next year, considering we're in the home stretch next year? And, do we anticipate maybe having a draft, or when we think we might see drafts, and how we're going to kind of vet that with this group when we kind of get down to writing all this input and incorporating everybody's feedback?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. We're, I think the challenge with the document like this, as you all recognize, is that this industry is and things are moving so quickly that we don't want to get too far out ahead of a legacy document that's mostly drafted a year out, and half of which becomes irrelevant by the end of next year. So I think we're really trying to take this feedback now, kind of draft out pieces as a framework, but look with an eye towards recognizing where we may be seeing changes kind of over the course of the next year as well. So I think we're looking at and we'll certainly develop and get out a better schedule with specifics on this. But I think looking at a mid next year timeframe to really start to share out some of this draft input, distilled input, maybe acknowledging some of the areas where perhaps we've seen some changes and need to perhaps revisit some areas, say in light of X, what other thoughts or feedback might you have? I think that's really the process that we'd be looking at kind of middle of next year, to make sure that we wrap up at the end of next year with a document that's that's really relevant and current to the topic, but with this feedback we've gotten over time. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Scott. Yes. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for presentation, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Item 4, labor implications of autonomous vehicles. We have Brenda Weiss, Vice President and Legislative Director for Teamsters 117. Brenda, welcome.
Good morning. I guess it might be almost afternoon. Happy to share just a brief presentation because I think after me might be a break. So I think Markel was going to load the slide deck for me.
Yep, I'm loading it right now. Just give me 1 second.
Perfect. While she's putting that up, I guess by way of introducing myself, I'm with Teamsters Local 117, and I guess I mean introducing our organization. Teamsters 117 is a statewide labor union here in Washington State. We generally say we represent everything from A to Z. That's folks in the airline industries all the way through zookeepers. We do, of course, represent a variety of folks in the driving professions, including folks who are CDL holders, as well as, line haul folks, and then, a variety of other package delivery people. The one thing I would say also about Teamsters in general, the Teamsters are not new to technology. If you think about what a Teamster used to be, we were founded in about 1901 here in the United States, and a Teamster used to be a man or a woman that drove a team of horses and pulled a wagon with your food or your beer or your ice or what have you. And so when I say we're not new to technology, we went through a major revolution when those automobiles that some folks would never replace team-driven wagons came into play. And here we are today in 2022, and over 1.5 million Teamsters nationwide. If you want to go ahead and go to the first slide, or second slide, I guess. I want to take a moment just to briefly talk about how many workers are actually going to be impacted when you think about the deployment of autonomous vehicle technology. And I used a funnel to kind of start at the top and work our way down to that smaller number. The federal government estimates that anywhere between 15.5 million workers in the United States will be impacted by autonomous vehicle implementation. This represents 1 in 9 workers, which is a fairly large number. But I'd like to kind of break that down into 2 general categories. There are 11.7 million folks who are people you would call on-the-job drivers. They might be driving for home care, or driving may comprise a large part of their work, but they are not necessarily the people that we're talking about when we are thinking about immediate autonomous vehicle deployment. So we narrow that down to about 3.8 million motor vehicle operators, and those are in professions that I would describe as moving things. In that 11.7 million number, there are also folks who are moving people. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Here in Washington State, these are some of the numbers that are estimated for motor vehicle operators, and it breaks it down by occupation. So here you can see what I was talking about, moving people and moving things. Now, these are very, very much estimates. It's a pretty small snapshot of folks who actually drive for a living. And the reason I say it's an estimate is because here in Washington State, these numbers from ESD are based on reported hours and earnings. So there's a whole host of folks who do not report hours and earnings in Washington State, since we don't actually collect an income tax here in Washington. A lot of that reporting on those professions and earnings is not something that we have complete data sets on. So the total number of estimated motor vehicle operator employees in Washington State is only about 90,000. Next slide. As I was saying, there's a very small this only captures a set of the workers employed in various professions. I've put up a number of pictures of things that may not be captured by our employment security department's data. The top picture represents our port drivers who are operating drayage, trucks, or our owner operators are predominantly classified by their companies as independent contractors. In the taxi sector, there are not as many entities who report on folks. These are sole proprietors. Uber and Lyft drivers are not reported in ESD's data. And then you look at folks who sometimes drive those white delivery vans that might be Amazon or might be someone else delivering packages. Also, people driving personal cars to deliver those packages. A lot of these professions, literally tens of thousands of folks who are doing this work, are not captured in the employment security data that I showed you on the previous graph. Next slide. But I want to focus on motor vehicle operators, and motor vehicle operators in particular in the trucking sector, not because those other jobs that transport stuff and people aren't important or significant, but because this is where a lot of commercial deployment is happening. And the trucking sector is complicated. There are a lot of different segments that are captured by the trucking profession. I did my best to capture that in these little hexagons over on the left. You can see I've broken them into various groups to try and capture the full breadth of the profession. Typically, when you're talking about local trucking, you're looking at less than 150 miles. Some parcel is captured in that, our port trucking and intermodal operators. Also, if you look on the right-hand side, I've broken out long haul drivers, which also then breaks into several other categories, which would include your private carriers. These are folks that maybe are working for a company themselves, directly employed by the company themselves, a Walmart, maybe a Coca-Cola. Then you have your for hire truckloads, which often includes your dry goods or your refrigerated goods that are contracting to move freight between places. And then several specialty types of trucks, flatbed, heavy equipment, your tanker trucks, which might be chemicals or food, car haul, etc. And then I suppose in general, you could also classify things as LTL or full truckload. LTL is less than truckload, and that can be local as well as long haul. As you can see, the US Department of Commerce has done some looking into what impact autonomous vehicles could have on our job market. And in their executive summary, they have identified that workers in some driving occupations may have difficulty finding alternative employment. These workers in motor vehicle operator jobs are older, are sometimes less educated, and for the most part have fewer transferable skills than other workers. These are folks who drive truck and that's what they do. And so as we talk about a transition away from those jobs, those are the folks that are really going to be at a loss to find other work without significant retraining. Next slide. Just a little bit more detail about what that actually means in terms of economic impact. The average wages, and this was from about 2014, so I assume those wages have gone up some, in particular with the advent of COVID and more of our reliance on trucking as we've gone through the pandemic. But the average wage for line haul and pickup and delivery drivers are between $60,000 and $70,000 per year. And I mean, as you have heard for quite some time, there's been a shortage of folks who can drive truck. These jobs in the sector are readily available to folks who have a commercial driver's license, can maintain a clean driving record, and pass the various background and job checks. In Washington State, these jobs are often a path to the middle class for many immigrant and refugee populations. For traditional employees in this sector and across most segments, these jobs also provide medical insurance, and a guaranteed retirement. At the Teamsters, we have pretty good data on that since we represent a variety of folks in these professions. And so we know that in Washington state, some of those wages and benefits are actually a guarantee of a secure family wage job in the state. Next slide. I wanted to look at 3 different scenarios that are based on recent studies for autonomous truck deployment nationally. And we've already heard today of some places where commercial deployment is already happening. So in the first scenario, and again, this assumes that most of you have seen a lot of the really great informational presentations over the months and years on the autonomous vehicle work group. But the first scenario of combined regular platooning and human drone platooning, because they're both pretty similar in the way you would look at them. It's initially cooperative adaptive cruise control platooning is already available and is being used and tested in many places. The drone platooning is when you have a lead truck operator with trucks following that are being operated off-site. I think the thing that is most important to note about platooning and the human drone version of platooning is that if states are not taking an active role, absence of the federal government taking a role in public policy to ensure things about the quality of jobs, these jobs are going to replace some of the highest paid long-haul jobs in the state, and will instead create local jobs that are likely to offer significantly lower pay. And so as you consider these scenarios, I really want folks to look at things through a little bit of a human and economic factor in terms of the broader workforce implications for residents here in Washington. Next slide. In scenario 2, it talks about using an exit to exit autonomous truck. And this is something that folks in the Silicon Valley, those developers are putting a lot of work into. Again, this would result in more job loss, but would again create more local jobs. But because the local jobs are not going to require certification or the same kinds of skills, we assume that these are jobs that are going to be much lower. And in this scenario, trucks would move off of the freeway to an exit, most likely to a depot where they could drop things and pick things up and go on to the next exit. So the autonomous portion of the driving would be to the exit, and then a human operator would need to take over in order to get to the final depot before freight is broken up and taken on to its next destination. Next slide. This is similar to the previous one except in that it's going from one distribution center to another, or from one distribution center to a retail location. This technology isn't yet ready. It requires technology to solve a lot of the problems that we actually heard about a little bit earlier of local driving, which is a lot more complex. When you think about our industrial areas, our port areas, places where distribution centers are moving freight to a store in a community. But at some point, this is going to be available for limited locations, especially within the line haul and less than truckload and parcel operations when you think about a United Parcel Service or a FedEx company. Once we have perfected technology in an exit to exit mode, this scenario should be treated as very likely because that, they will have mastered the art of getting off the interstate and maneuvering in a much more complex scenario. Let's go to the next slide. Before I dig into the policy strategies that we could use to address some of these job losses, I just want to do a quick look back on the previous scenarios and slides and statistics, for instance. When we talk about line haul and freight hauling, again, we're talking about your typical tractor trailer combination that's hauling goods and et cetera to stores and distribution centers. One of the things that isn't captured by this presentation or the data that I have shown are the hundreds of thousands of jobs in parcel delivery and pickup and delivery networks that are, have seen pretty explosive growth during the pandemic as more and more folks are having freight and other items, groceries, shipped to their homes. So these strategies that I'm about to reference in no way address that issue. And they also are not addressing the issue of moving people. And when I talk about moving people, I'm talking about, every step of the way, from your city bus to your taxi to your rideshare driver. These are all technologies that are in development, and as others have noted, being deployed in cities across America. And with the advent of driverless technology, you're looking at a real loss of jobs for folks who are, again, often immigrants or refugees in our community that come and get an entry-level driving job and work their way up to a more complex profession in the driving world, because most folks come knowing how to drive a car. And even before they can learn or master a language, they know that they can drive a person or a good from point A to point B. So although these policy strategies talk about freight and truck driving, I think it's really important to note that there needs to be a broader discussion about how we can transition people out of those entry-level jobs and even more complex jobs in the people moving and freight moving systems that aren't captured by these policy strategies. I've put 3 up on the board. These are not new news. They're not particularly cutting edge. These are the kinds of things that we would apply to just about any work site here in Washington. We need to develop an industry-wide approach so that we know that workers are going to have the tools that they need across all of the different segments. We need to provide paths for strong career development, and we need to ensure our safety net programs are in place and ready to retrain workers or provide benefits as they find new and different work. Next slide. When I'm talking about developing an industry-wide approach, I just want to acknowledge that job loss isn't necessarily imminent right now, but the big changes in the industry are going to require many workers to adjust the course of their careers. And the only way that we're going to be able to address the needs of a significant number of workers here in Washington State across a very diverse set of industry segments is to bring business, labor, and public sector resources together. We're going to have to talk about how we can design and carry out a policy or a program that will address the impacts of job loss. And we need to figure out what workers who have committed their careers to hauling people or freight are interested in pursuing as an alternative career, and what transferable skills they can use to do that. Next slide. Career pathways are really having a moment, as is apprenticeship right now. There's been a lot of talk about worker retraining and investing dollars in training programs. That's definitely the case when it comes to driving as well. I think the other thing we should think about in terms of these pathways is ensuring that we have updated commercial driver training and credentialing. And that's going to have to be developed ahead of this transition. It should be done also in partnership with the industry stakeholders and worker organizations, but we also need to start partnering with our community and technical colleges to identify, again, what kinds of transferable skills and jobs these workers can transfer into, and what kinds of classes and curriculum need to be developed to accommodate them. On the job training program, so that drivers who transition out of driving and into a new role, such as inspecting the autonomous trucks or doing a last mile piece, or in fact, even in the maintenance or even in a drone drone monitoring role, can be implemented in order to complement or in order to allow for drivers to transition from one role to another within the industry. And then again, not particularly cutting edge, but using our career counseling services and our dislocated worker programs through partnerships with unions, state agencies, and local organizations. We have a really robust WorkSource program and dislocated worker program here in Washington State. And so we're really well poised to use those kinds of tools to help workers. Next slide. I think that a couple of things around our existing safety net programs and how we support workers that are specific to the industry. Obviously, we want to build off of on-the-job training to include some work share programs, and we have a pretty robust structure for that in Washington State. But I think we also need to look at, in particular, for workers who may be losing all of the benefits that they've used to support their family, or the retirement benefits that they planned on utilizing for their end of career. We need to figure out how we can bridge that gap from loss of job into new job or transitioning out of a job. That's why that second sentence is, when we're looking at an older workforce, as we are, particularly in the longer haul and freight moving situation, we need to look at ways that those folks who could retire have an opportunity to retire instead of taking job training benefits, so that they can move out of the workforce and make room for others who could take advantage of that job training. And then the last bit is really just an acknowledgement that our federal WARN Act has not really kept pace with the change in work environment. The worker adjustment and retraining notification only applies to employers of 100 or more employees. And as we've already noted in the trucking segments and industry, there are folks who are employees, there are folks who are contractors and independent contractors. We need to ensure that the WARN Act is being updated to accommodate all of those folks, because as we look at the trucking profession as a whole, people that are employees as well as are non-employees are still going to need that notice and planning, and be allowed to look for a new job or seek additional training to be employed in the workforce, to care for themselves, and also to not overly burden our state safety net. And I think that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Brenda.
You bet.
Questions or comments? Oh, yes, Representative Kloba.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much, Brenda. That was a great and very informative presentation. So I appreciate you putting that all together. And I'm going to ask something, and it's not, I think it could be conceived as like pushback, but it isn't. It is just a straight up curiosity. About mid presentation, you kind of talked about that the replacement jobs might not be as high paying, might not have the same benefits, et cetera. And I just, as I think about it, most of those types of jobs are going to be very IT heavy. And what I know about IT industry is that it pays pretty well. And so is there a basis for the lower pay? Do we have somewhere we're looking at and we've seen that that's happened? Help me understand that assumption. And again, I'm not pushing back, it's just out of curiosity.
Sure. There were a number of studies that I pulled from when I created the PowerPoint itself. One of them is from a report, and actually when the slides go out, you can see the citations at the bottom of the slides under the different scenarios. There are a lot of assumptions that those folks that are being made, that the folks that are monitoring screens in the drone operation, or just monitoring the movement of freight, are not going to require as much training or skill as the original driving position, and they're not writing the code. They're not performing particularly technical work or skilled work. They're monitoring a program as a computer monitor operator or a dispatcher. That's not to say that we couldn't pay them a lot more money, but the assumption is based on the fact that it's not going to be as skilled, air quotes, right? Take as long to develop that skill as it does to develop the skill to be a successful long haul driver. Again, that might sound like kind of cognitive dissonance, but like the amount of time it takes to learn to drive a heavy truck is substantial, right? You don't want somebody who just hopped behind a wheel one day to get on the freeways and drive a motor vehicle at a high rate of speed. But the amount of time it takes to train someone to monitor something on a screen, you could even think of it like a video game. It's much less practical application, and so that is the assumption in the study based on why those would be lower paying jobs.
Okay, because that's interesting, because as I think about the person who might be monitoring, if they're a person who's only driven a car for a couple of years versus a highly experienced truck driver who understands the physics behind it and how different it is from driving a car, that's the person I want in case there's an emergency that happens for which you would need the backup driver. I want them to understand exactly how a truck operates and the implications of that. So it would seem to me, if I were an employer, I would look for somebody who knows how to drive a truck. But that may be, an entirely different conversation that it would be interesting to hear from the actual potential employers of somebody like that. But yeah, I truly value the skills of the truck driver. I know that's not an easy job. So, all right, well, thanks for that discussion. I appreciate it.
Sure. And I would just add one thing. I mean, one of the things that we are seeing is that in the states that are deploying this kind of technology, there's been legislation and also just practical usage that there's been a safety operator behind the wheel in case there is a technology fail as this stuff is being deployed. The other thing to consider about what they would call your drone operator, or the person who's monitoring things remotely, is that a lot of the folks who have the skills to drive the trucks may not have the cross application skills, the computer knowledge. And so many of the people, you're going to see a skills gap in the people that drive the trucks, not moving over into the jobs that are more technology based in monitoring the trucks. They're going to take their skills and find other work or retire is what they are likely predicting.
Thank you, Brenda. Rima, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. This was great, Brenda. I really appreciated the perspective and thought that went into this and the actual recommendations of what can we do about this? So it's good to be thinking about this because it's going to take some time to definitely turn this corner. But I'm just kind of curious what, maybe we've got Steve Gordon on, I know we've got Sherry Call attending. I'm just kind of curious what, the Trucking Association, thinks about all this, kind of get their perspective on these recommendations as well, given it was so truck driver focused. I'm kind of curious to hear, what their thoughts are.
Steve, I see you turned on your camera. Do you want to speak?
Well, I wouldn't presume to speak for the association. So Sherry's on the call. I'd certainly let her do that. But as somebody that worked in the industry employing drivers for 30 years, a lot of what Brenda was talking about rings true. I mean, part of what drivers are paid for today, not only the skills they develop, but they're paid a premium for the inconvenience and being away from home that the rest of us don't experience. But the flip side of it is they get in the industry because they kind of want to be away from home. they don't want an office job. I would suspect that if you polled them, 90% of them would rather do anything in the world than sit in the office on a computer monitoring trucks all day, because I know how tough it was to turn those folks into dispatchers in our place, which is kind of the same thing. So there's definitely not just a skills gap, but a mentality gap that I think will play a big role in whatever happens there. And I suspect that there'll be a lot fewer monitors than there would be individual drivers of trucks. So I don't think that would totally get us there, but I did like Representative Kloba's comments that having people that understand the physics and the job itself would be a beneficial skill. No doubt about it.
Thank you for your comments, Steve. Anyone else want to comment on that? On Rima's question?
I saw that Sherry had left a comment that her video wasn't working. She was going to try and chime in on audio. I don't know if she's trying.
It looks like she's trying to connect now, so maybe just give her 1 minute
Okay, we'll give her just a minute. I see Anna's hand is up as well. So Anna, you're
Oh,
next.
great.
Yeah, this is in a slightly different direction, but I'm really curious about the sort of move towards contract work and what I've seen here in Seattle with Via to Transit, which is, you know, sort of a not autonomous vehicles, but a pilot of sort of, you know, new mobility and what would it be like to provide last mile services. The drivers there, I use it, you know, somewhat frequently, and I've never had a driver that's been there for more than 15 days. There's just incredible turnover. And I am concerned about sort of the safety implications when you have a workforce that, say, isn't lower paid or is more remote, that has a lot of turnover, what that will mean for safety, just because there's that sort of churn and lack of long-term experience. So Brenda, I don't know if you have any comment on that. I know it's a little different than the trucking world, but I think there's probably some overlap.
I mean, and to be clear, 100% clear to all of my other Teamsters brothers and sisters out there in the world, I do not have a corner on the market in terms of understanding the trucking world. There are far more Teamster locals that do more freight and do long haul and do parcel delivery than my local union. But what I do know about is hauling people. And I would agree, there is a direct correlation to folks who, I mean, if you think about it, teenage drivers are less good on the road than adult drivers, less skilled. And that's because they have a lack of experience on the road, you know, doing the work that they do. And you can see a correlation to folks who have more skill and time on the job than those who have less skill. So hopefully folks who are driving your last mile transit or your Uber or your Lyft or your shuttle driver have spent some time driving before they chose to log on to an app. But I think that the real challenge in a lot of these professions is that an on-demand workforce has not necessarily recognized the skill or rewarded the skill that some folks bring to these positions with, you know, commensurate pay and benefits. There is a trade-off in that, you know, many people who do on-demand work want to have a flexible schedule, and many people in the urban areas make a career out of doing that work. They've moved from taxi to an Uber or Lyft, or maybe they've taken on a job with Via or driving MV, you know, a small passenger van to do so. And those jobs come with benefits and greater pay. But yeah, there is a real correlation between folks' willingness to stay on the job, particularly now across all the sectors. Driving's not immune to doing work that doesn't pay as well or offer the benefits that they need to support themselves or their families. And there is, although I'm asserting it because I don't have a study on a slide to back it up, but there is a direct correlation between people who don't do this job as frequently as people who do, and you know how safe they are in their performance of those job duties.
Thank you for that, Brenda. Other questions or comments? Were we able to get a question from Sherry?
I believe Sherry's on now.
Sherry, did you want to speak?
She said she's having issues hearing or connecting. She did send a message, Mr. Chair, that I can at least read. I think
Please read.
it's
Yes.
shareable. She said she's in agreement with Brenda. The anticipation is that there will be a greater demand for local and regional jobs. However, the jobs and career opportunities surrounding trucking, such as safety and HR, need to be considered here. Former drivers make some of the best professional resources when it comes to back office operations. And in this regard, she doesn't see a lot of displacement.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Other questions for Brenda? Oh, yes, Armand.
Hello, sorry if there's background noise. I just wanted to chime in as well that with AV testing that we've seen in Seattle, we have read a lot of reports that the AV testing companies are using contracted employees for many of their operational positions, including test drivers, cleaning the vehicles, kind of setting them up for the day to run their test cycle. So I just wanted to flag that too, that we're seeing companies like use contractors, and I want to flag that as a potential item to just keep an eye out for as like the labor force switches to more of a contract-based system for AV operations.
Thank you, Armand. Other questions or comments for Brenda?
I really thank you guys for an opportunity to talk about some of this stuff in my corner of the world. Just because we're using, contract folks to do that work today as we're rolling things out, doesn't mean that we can't come up with a robust strategy to make these good jobs and to make local jobs and regional jobs in this sector, well-paying and jobs that folks want to enter into. I just think we have to put our thinking caps on with all of our business partners and state agencies and community and technical college partners to ensure that we're providing the kinds of skills that workers can use to build on their careers and to actually have promotional opportunities so that we have, a robust economy that really builds towards a middle class for folks in these kinds of professions.
Thank you so much. Yes, Shiv.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just have one small question with Brenda. Is there about a year ago or 2 years ago, there was a mass shortage of truck drivers throughout the nation. We are one small state out of 50 states, and being such a big country, there'll always be imbalance of labor requirements and shortages and access, in the country. So as a result of, as a result of the supply chain, the problem became the biggest, in terms of truck driver. So by having these autonomous vehicles, and then you're worried about that truck driver will not be getting an employment, wouldn't that kind of balance it out in the nation, so to speak?
I mean, I think that that's a question that we could spend quite a lot of time debating, and I'm sure people don't want to do that. But I guess my perspective would be that there are employment shortages across the board, and in particular in the supply chain. I think that if you look back to some seminal events in labor and workforce history, one of them would be the deregulation of trucking, which has seen downward pressure on wages and benefits for the truck driving career, as well as the advent of use of more independent contractors in the field. Those are much lower paying jobs, much less desirable jobs for folks, particularly our drayage drivers are very, very low paid. And many people choose not to go into the career because it is a long time to be away from your family, and the pay and the benefits do not offset the sacrifice that you make to take on that work. So yes, there's a shortage of folks who have CDL drivers or CDLs in the country, and that's impacted our supply chain. I think what the question remains is, why does that shortage exist? Is it because there aren't people that don't have time to get the skill or aren't acquiring the skill? Or is it because people aren't entering the workforce because they don't see it as a job that will take care of themselves and their families?
Thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Brenda?
You guys, this is the hot seat. I haven't seen you grill anybody else as much.
They actually did grill you pretty good today. So, okay. Thank you so much, Brenda. We appreciate your presentation.
That just means we're listening. Not tuned out.
Exactly. Okay, so we were scheduled to take a break, but we are running early. So I'm going to go ahead and start our break now. We'll say as of 12:35, and we'll come back at 12:50. Does that work for everyone? Okay, so we are.
So Chair
Yes.
Restucci, just to let you know, the next presenter, Dr. Dannenberg, cannot join until 1 p.m.
Can't jump to 1?
Correct.
Okay, well, I guess we'll just take a longer break then, folks, and please keep your cameras on. And we will be back at right at 1 o'clock. Thank you. We are joined by Dr. Andy Dannenberg, affiliate professor at the University of Washington, and Saba Fatima, paper development lead, former University of Washington student, on equity and AV paper. Dr. Dannenberg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Let me just give you a little bit of background of what we're doing, and Saba will give the primary presentation, and then we'll both take your questions on discussion. I've been serving as the chair of the subcommittee on health and equity for the AV work group. And we brought up lots of issues over time. We've talked with you several times in the past. And one of the things that came up was that the equity component of autonomous vehicles, what are the major concerns? And so we decided it'd be worth just trying to review basically from the literature. We were not going out doing surveys or anything. What are the primary equity concerns related to autonomous vehicles? So I teach a course on built environment and health. I put it out to the class, who would like to work with me? And Saba took the primary role of digging through things and has done just a really nice job of pulling the information together and organizing it. And we have since written up a paper that I think is now shared with you or can be shared with you. It's been submitted for publication, and we really want to be able to present it to anyone who's going to be interested, and particularly for this group. So I'm going to turn it over to Saba. She was an architecture student here while she was working with us on built environment issues. She's currently an architect in Baltimore, working with a design firm there, but has broader interests in built environment and in equity, which is why she got involved with this. There was another student, Eric Lee, who also contributed to this, but Saba really did the bulk of the work and took the lead on it. So Saba, all yours, and then we'll work together on discussions and questions. So thank you for doing the presentation.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just start with sharing screen. So our paper is titled Equity Issues Associated with the Widespread Implementation of Autonomous Vehicles. Just a second here. Okay, here we go. So a little background, as we may all know, that transportation is pretty important in terms of accessibility, and it impacts a lot of people's access to their job, education, healthcare, and other daily needs activities. In our literature review, we outline some of the impact groups or historically disadvantaged groups when it comes to transportation planning and transportation access. And they include low-income people, racial minorities, immigrants, refugees, women, people with disabilities, seniors, teenagers here, implying that children who have not yet reached the drivable age, and rural residents. And AVs, their future expected widespread implementation may create a heaven or hell scenario for these disadvantaged groups, where they may potentially have a lot of benefits and increase their accessibility to daily needs activities, or have or exacerbate the existing disproportionate equitable situation. So we do acknowledge that equity is a factor, is considered in a lot of statewide policies in Washington state and other states in the US, including in transportation planning. But with this paper, we're not presenting anything avant-garde or new, but kind of exploring how different policies or suggestions can be incorporated with AVs and equity to have more informed policies in future. So the challenge here is converting these suggestions into actionable policies that have minimal negative impacts or adverse effects going forward. So the method we started by reviewing 7 known articles about public health impacts on AVs. And then from there, we looked at different citations and references using snowballing technique. We identified 60 other papers that had some mention of equity in them, and then started from there looking at all the possible factors that could impact equity. Our focus in this paper is not the initial level of autonomous vehicles, but the more futuristic widespread use, so levels 4 and 5. And we ended up organizing the different areas that we found, consolidating them into 10 areas of possible impacts, and then subgrouping them into 3 categories. The first one would be, the first category would have to do with a lot of a lot of the background framework of how AVs can be rolled out during their widespread use or just leading up to that. The second category would be directly talking about how some of these different disadvantaged groups, how equity relates directly to them and how it can be made better for them. The third one, I think Brenda's touched upon the loss of existing or how equity, workforce and equity. So those are the three subcategories. Starting with the first area of equity impact, community mobility assessment. We felt this is important because communities need to be addressed, whether it's geographical areas or social groups of communities, assessing their needs and what kind of AV services would they require based on geography as well as a social community or a social group. Their requirements, their needs may change, and possible policy suggestions. We feel that community engagement and their representation is important, which again is not something new, but maximizing their participation in forming these policies by providing some incentives for their participation, that sort of thing, and promoting promoting shared use of AVs rather than individual use. This keeps coming up in a lot of our policies because overall, we think that the hell case of AVs would be if people start, a lot of private vehicles come on the road and it becomes sort of not really affecting public transportation as it should. So the second factor would be education and outreach. Kind of related, a lot of these areas are interrelated and depend on each other in some cases, but with education and outreach, a big factor about community outreach is the barriers of education that may again depend on people, correlations with people with low education or immigrants who may not be as willing to participate if they do not understand the full possible benefits of AVs. So possible policies would be to increase public awareness by conducting active educational outreach and spread the information in as many languages or multiple popular languages as possible. The third one would be infrastructure quality disparity. Our understanding from the literature we reviewed is that AVs require a certain level of infrastructure to be able to operate on roads. And unsurprisingly, some places may not have the best road infrastructure, and equity comes in here to ensure that there is more uniform distribution of funding. So all of these road infrastructure that are necessary can be developed. One approach to that could be prioritizing the basic infrastructure, such as lane markings that look at making sure that all roads are equitably getting the funding for basic infrastructure, so it can help other modes of transportation as well, not just AVs. So that kind of creates a more easier situation to go about that. Equitable access to AVs across all neighborhoods. The absence of this may look like longer wait times or people in certain neighborhoods not getting the full benefit because either they have to wait for a long time to use these AVs or they're just not accessible to them at certain times of the day. So reviewing proposed, when it comes to companies that provide these services, possible policies could be reviewing their proposed service areas and coming back and after a period of operation, coming back and checking if they are actually providing it uniformly to all these proposed areas. The other policy could be to process and to assess whether the data used from AI or the computer generated data, this is collected equitably, although we don't have a lot of information that exists about such data. We have an inkling from one or two papers that the way data is collected can inform or can have equitable impacts on where the service is provided. Now we jump into the different areas that directly affect people or disadvantaged groups. The first one would be persons with low income. Unsurprisingly, AVs may come with a high cost initially or later. And to make this more accessible to everyone, possible policies could be to provide targeted subsidies to low-income persons, and encouraging engagement from disadvantaged communities from the policy level itself to spread awareness about this new technology or new mode of transportation. So when incentives are provided, it's a successful program. The second is access to smartphones. Although most houses, most households, most individuals do have smartphones at this point, but there may be some low-income persons or persons who are quite old who do not know how to use smartphones, or persons from different backgrounds. And the possible policies would be, as we have Orca card in Washington State, perhaps different ways of accessing AVs for use. Shared infrastructure services. So again, when it comes to funding, which can be very tricky, we think it would be difficult to allocate funding just for AVs. So prioritizing infrastructure developments or funding that can help benefit all modes of transportation and encourage a more different public transportations as well, and not just creating a situation where the transportation in the industry is dominated by private vehicles. Giving lower priority to roadway to vehicle communication. So the more advanced technologies would probably receive lower priority in funding and first cover the basic requirements. Barriers to shared AV use, which a big concern is safety, especially for women or people from minorities or genders. So the possible policies would be to develop different safety measures that are incorporated with the AVs within the vehicles, including video recording or audio recording or emergency buttons. This policy or having such strategies could again raise issues about privacy. So some of these policies need to be worked out very carefully without causing discrimination. For example, women or people who are vulnerable should have some level of ability to choose when ride sharing, since we're promoting a shared vehicle mode. They should be able to choose who they ride with in certain scenarios, especially during night times, but if without being discriminatory to other people who may already be in the car. So access to AV by persons with disabilities. So possible policies to, again, for AVs to be accessible by all people, including persons with disabilities, would be to require a certain proportion of vehicles that are serviced by a certain company or different companies to have a certain proportion of vehicles that cater to and provide the ADA standards for hearing, visual, and just wheelchair requirements, ensuring that a certain percentage of all AVs do cater to these requirements. Again, subsidies for persons with disabilities, also supporting research to understand different factors that may affect AV's acceptance rate. A lot of the papers we looked at, they showed a lot of benefits with persons for disabilities who cannot independently travel without AVs or without someone without someone taking them there. So ensuring that this is done properly would have a lot of benefits. Brenda touched upon potential disruption of existing transport jobs. So unsurprisingly, there will be a lot of people out of jobs, but there will be new jobs that the AV industry will generate. A good point that Brenda made was transferable skills. And I think that's really important because some of the persons employed in the sector may not be able to transfer skills, but since the introduction of AVs will be gradual, there's a lot of potential there for existing drivers to be transferred into similar jobs that may be mechanical upkeep of vehicles or background support. So again, just summarizing the different policies that we have, we group them into two types. The first would be the overhead level, where a certain jurisdiction or state would look at what policies can be implemented in the area. And then the second type of group of policies would be governing the companies that provide these services. So the first one, including representatives of disadvantaged populations in AV policy, incentivize people to participate in public meetings and public groups right from the planning stage and assessing their community needs, and to get all the information needed to provide a more holistic approach. Developing a framework to assess AV affordability for persons with low income. The third one would be developing a process to assess equity in funding AV infrastructure improvements. So any policies that we make governing AV should be reviewed from an equity perspective to see that it uniformly benefits all sections of the population. Developing a strategy to encourage AV ride sharing instead of private use of vehicles. Again, this could be to encourage or to kind of advertise or just promote safe use or the safety features, perhaps for people who are not as ready to use use AVs. Developing job retraining programs for persons losing transport jobs. This again can be done gradually. For example, just with Brenda's talk, it came to mind that people right now for freight vehicles, truck drivers who may lose their jobs, if they choose to do so, can maybe, as we gradually transfer to level 4, level 5 automation, we do require a person behind the wheels in the first few levels. So there could be the people that are behind the wheel and then provide background support later if they choose to follow their career path in that direction. Developing ongoing monitoring and evaluation of AV services. So we periodical assessment of how these programs are taking shape, or how the companies are providing services and making changes as necessary, as this would be a new technology. And then policies that relate to service providers and regulating service providers in a way. Reviewing how the company plans to accommodate different types of accessibility with persons with disabilities, making sure that they provide the required standards and they keep it up as they go. Reviewing the safety and security procedures for vulnerable AV users, including women, that again, it brings up video recording, emergency buttons and such, which would then require a careful review of the privacy policy, such as the car videos and also the data stored in these with the companies about people's addresses and phone numbers and such. Reviewing AV service areas and service times proposed by the company, and then coming back and reviewing whether their services are equitably distributed geographically across the service city or town. Reviewing artificial intelligence algorithms used. This, again, we don't have a lot of information at the moment, but we do feel that the way data is collected can have impacts on AV service areas and how different people from different communities are serviced. So limitations of our study was just because the field is developing and there's a lot of knowledge that we still do not know. We do have limitations from that front, and also a lot of information is proprietary and not disclosed to the public from the companies that are already operating. So that was one of the limitation. And we also just focused on vehicles, passenger vehicles rather than freight vehicles. And conclusion. So our suggested policies do relate and are compatible with other other Washington state policies that promote equity. And the current work we've designed it, the focus on equity group, it's an ongoing effort with the AV work group. So yep. I think that kind of, also we need a lot of integrated or collaborative informed policies or collaborative from different professionals, including public health, social services, transportation, and other fields to inform our policies as we go forward. I think that kind of brings us to the end of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Saba. So that is intended basically as an overview of here are what some of the equity issues for consideration as policies move forward related to AVs. What we wanted to bring out is what are the areas that need policies, but we don't have the expertise to turn that into what wording you would need to actually write the policy or write a law. And probably many of you in the audience have more of that skill. But so the point was get the information out of areas that need consideration with some kind of higher level ideas of what and how it could be addressed. And then we welcome your comments, and any of you who have those skills of how you would turn some of these into actual written policies or laws, we more than welcome that, because we don't have those skills. But thank you, and I'm open for discussion and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dannenberg. Thank you, Saba. Questions or comments for our guests? I'm looking. Yes. Shiv.
Yes, Saba, very good presentation. You actually showed us the way by creating some policies to help us implement the process, implement the program. This is the most difficult part of implementing the equity issues in any system, whether it's the tolling, whether it's the ferry thing that we are dealing with the state. In this case, you're talking about the AV program. So I really commend you for coming up with some policy issues which will help us to start implementing some of these programs, not just study, and then dies after that. That's the plan that you brought up forward. Thank you for that.
Good, thank you.
Representative Kloba.
This is more a comment. Thank you very much for that presentation. Thanks for the deep thought and research that went into this. And especially thank you for thinking about consumer digital data privacy as well as algorithmic bias. Those are two very important things, and they do go hand in hand with the development of this fantastic technology. But yeah, sometimes they're a little more invisible to people. So I just appreciate you calling that out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The algorithmic bias, there's a little bit of literature on it. It is remarkably difficult to show. And there's a few papers out, some of which I have questions on, well, they're done or whatever, because it's just very difficult to know what that bias is. And is it written into the algorithm, or is it the effect of it's not written there, but it has an effect that you would need, more studies to show that. And the few things that have been done with like Lyft and Uber is actually measuring, and there's a couple of cities that did this, that the wait time or the cancellation rate in minority areas or low income areas was, they could actually calculate what is the wait time or the cancellation rate, and could show some of those biases by actual measurement. And whether you could do similar kinds of studies once you have AVs. It's just an area that's going to need work, because there's not easy ways to measure those biases, but they can be real, and it needs attention.
Jim, you're on mute.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dannenberg. Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I think we have an attendee who has their hand raised, and I believe they can unmute now.
Okay. Whoever you are, you have the floor.
I do think that's my dad, and he probably not. Yeah,
Okay.
that's not a mistake.
That's awesome.
That's good.
Yes. Did you want to speak though, Ahmed?
Probably not. It's probably a mistake.
All right, no worries.
Dad's rock.
Yep, Dad's rock. I agree. Okay.
And I would welcome hearing from any of you as you do, move further along with reports or policies, or, that this is to get information in front of you for further thought. And I really would like further conversations on it at appropriate, as needed. I'm not sure from this committee what, final reports will look like, or if any of you will be developing actual wording for legislation or anything like that, but I'd be very happy to be part of any of those discussions where it's useful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dannenberg. Rima, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dannenberg and Saba. That was really good. To your point, Dr. Dannenberg, on process, a lot of ideas came forward in this presentation, and also Brenda in her prior presentation had some ideas and recommendations. And so while it's the first time everybody's kind of hearing about it today, I just wanted to point out that when we get to the agenda item in a little bit on recommendations from this work group, maybe keep this in mind if there's anything that stood out from you in any of these presentations that you as members want to propose or make a motion to move forward to the commission specifically. That would be welcome, I think. And I just wanted to raise that now because Saba had a lot of really important information, and if any of you need to go back and look at any of those slides or have questions, now would be a great time to raise that in case you are thinking of advancing some of them.
Yeah, and feel free to share those slides anyway. Consider them public domain.
Thank you so much. Other questions or comments? I'm looking. Looks like they're letting you off. Thank you, Dr. Dannenberg. Thank you, Saba. We appreciate your presentation.
Okay. Well,
For
thank
having
you.
me.
Good, and happy to talk to anybody whenever useful. So good, thank you. I'll stick around, Saba. You're welcome to listen in if you want to. Go ahead.
Okay, next, moving on to item 6, AV pilot proposal. Scott Shogun, Vice President, WSP USA.
Okay.
Scott.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon now, everybody. Nice to be back with you again. Let me just share out my screen here. Hopefully you can see that. Good to be with you to talk about this topic. I know we've introduced this topic over the course of several meetings. The focus that we had this year on advancing an AV pilot program for the state. So, essentially, we wanted to kind of start from the beginning a little bit, if you will, here, in terms of kind of how we got here over the course of the last year. So last year, there was a recommendation to this body that came from the Transportation Commission to advance a state AV pilot and really establish a scope and a plan for such a pilot and to advance that back to the legislature by the 2023 legislative session. And really, the overarching question of why I think our group felt this is really a logical next step in the work group process. The work group has obviously convened over the last several years, a lot of opportunity to talk and discuss current actions that are happening across the industry, across the state. But an AV pilot putting something on the road with an opportunity for interaction would really put those efforts into a real world environment and help to serve as that culmination of kind of lessons learned over the course of the work group. So that's really effectively, how did we get to this idea of advancing a pilot? So what are those goals that we get out of that? The idea behind advancing this pilot is really gaining that hands-on exposure to AV technology, understanding what it takes to put that on the road, to keep the occupants of the vehicle and other users of the roadway safe, and really to help identify those unique policy needs to Washington State for safe deployment. So, we've heard over the course of time, others have done this. Why can't we learn from them? And certainly there are things that can be learned from other locations. But the idea here being that each state does have some unique circumstances, unique regulatory environment, unique attributes that really warrant looking at this from a Washington State perspective. Finally, it gives an opportunity really to develop approaches to harness the technology in an equitable manner. So we've seen, I know in the comments that we got back in our earlier discussion on Roadmap to the Future, again, touching on that focus on equity, which is critically important, and something that really this group gets to then kind of harness through executing a pilot to really specifically look at equity and how equity can be addressed through the pilot process. So just facts about this, what the pilot is, it's that opportunity for firsthand experience with the technology. It's really that chance to identify policy needs, agency readiness considerations, regulatory hurdles, all of those elements that are specific to you and your agencies, and to as well to really understand how could the technology serve disadvantaged communities, and what are those barriers to access, and how can we begin to break those down. What the pilot is not, to be clear, is this is not in any way expected to be a testing or a research effort for the AV developers. The idea behind this is that this is AV technology that's already kind of well developed, deployed in other locations. This is not their research project. This is really to be used for the objectives of the state. It is not a long-term service operating. It's not expected to compete with non-automated vehicle approaches. This is really something for it is for a short duration. It's to explore this technology and how it would work, and really build the learning approach as part of the work group. And again, it's not a duplication of other states' efforts. It's really intended to be an opportunity for stakeholders and agencies in Washington State to put their hands directly on this technology and really understand what it means to them and their agencies to be able to deploy it in context unique to Washington. So goals and objectives, and again, this is what we've kind of laid out before for you. Equity in particular, really understanding how this technology can be harnessed in an equitable manner, looking at transit accessibility, disadvantaged communities, and really exploring those barriers to access and understanding how to break them down. Public awareness is a critical piece of this, just broader public understanding of the capabilities of this technology, how it can be used safely, and really using this as an opportunity to measure that public opinion, measure the reaction to the technology. And finally, organizational knowledge. Each of the agencies involved really understanding their roles, how to build partnerships to deploy this technology, what are some of the regulatory issues and hurdles, and just overall preparedness, as we've kind of talked about agency readiness earlier today. So the support for the mandate to prepare for AVs. So this was really the directive in the current law that's that created the work group, was to direct the Transportation Commission and the work group to prepare for automated vehicles. And the idea being that a pilot can really help inform that process and be part of that preparedness going forward in terms of agency readiness and regulatory hurdles there. So the use case that we talked about during our last discussion was really a last mile use case that was focused on increasing accessibility to transit in urban and in small city and town settings. So we wanted to look at two different contexts for deployment of this technology. And we received a lot of feedback through that process in that discussion, including essentially look past purely a last mile focus. This could be a point-to-point service, kind of where are the gaps and opportunities, and don't kind of confine ourselves around that. A lot of concern about the need that potential agencies or organizations that could run this are all very resource strapped in terms of the human resources to pull this off. That any kind of pilot would really need to be kind of a turnkey approach that would come with all of the resources, financial and technical support to deliver on this. Recognition that a pilot is not going to solve everything, that it's not a solution to the broader questions on mobility, but much more a learning opportunity, and needs to be really viewed like that. So again, I won't read all of these, but just kind of getting a sense of the broader feedback that we got that then informed what we're going to share with you today, to make sure that we're aligned with the priorities of this group. So beyond that, we took this out to stakeholders over the course of the summer to get some feedback as well. We had an opportunity to present to the Washington State Transit Association, and really, again, focused on our original focus of that this would be an opportunity for transit agencies to be able to leverage the technology, seek these pilot opportunities and deliver on these. There, I think we can characterize it as there was a lot of interest overall in the technology and how it could help them, but a lot of concern over the agency's ability to deliver a pilot opportunity, just based on staffing and resource constraints, as we kind of talked about previously. Secondly, we put out a request for information out to industry, out to a very broad group of technology providers in this area. We did get 3 responses. One of those was from a technology company, and 2 from more turnkey service providers, companies that can work with other technology developers to deliver on pilot programs. And really what we saw out of that was a validation of both interest and capability of the industry to fulfill the concept that we had outlined. So that was really important for us to see, and needed to confirm that there was interest, that the industry could come to the table to meet this. We did get a cost range. You can see it is wide, but it really depends on a lot of different factors. And what we saw did help us understand kind of what the needs would be here. I think the huge factor in this cost range is really duration of the pilot as a big factor. So also the types of vehicles, the number of vehicles running a particular route. There were a lot of considerations here. We also did get to kind of validate this against the activity that some other states experienced in terms of executing their pilots as well, and an understanding of costs there as well, which helped inform our cost estimation as part of this process. So the recommendation that we're bringing forward today to this group for action is to support development and funding of an AV pilot program, really recommending to the legislature to appoint a lead state agency and to provide funding for an AV pilot to further advance the mission of the AV work group. So what does that look like? So first of all, from a use case standpoint, we heard the feedback last time, which was important. We heard the feedback from transit agencies in terms of their abilities or challenges in implementing this. and recognize that that can be much more open in terms of those uses. So in addition to last mile, we can look at point-to-point service. And some examples of those services, as we think about last mile, connections from transit hubs to community centers or shopping facilities or healthcare. Point to point could really look at, how do we connect more, residential areas or community centers to some of those important facilities to bridge some of those connections for populations that that may have challenges with those connections. So just to give you some sense of how those use cases could look in a pilot context. Again, we're still focused on 2 operating environments, one an urban environment, one a small city or town environment. We think that's important to understand that context, in different parts of the state, different populations, understand those barriers a little bit differently. And again, focusing on turnkey, that feedback that we got that agencies are really challenged to put the human capital into this process was a recognition that that this pilot approach really needed to be turnkey in terms of bringing on a company that could deliver the overall pilot with a relatively light touch from the lead agency and other public partners. So what would that look like? A turnkey pilot delivery would include the route planning, infrastructure deployment, delivering and testing the vehicles on the route, securing all of those permits, actually operating and staffing the pilot once the testing is complete. With that comes developing all of the plans and documentation for safe operation, the kind of the concept of operations, the safety plan, communications plans, coordinating with stakeholders, and then ultimately preparing summary documentation, some of the research elements of the pilot that we had outlined previously to really gain that feedback. So that is the ask here, to make sure that we've got the funding for a turnkey pilot. Again, based on the input that we receive on the funding standpoint, in terms of the cost from the responses that we received, as well as some other pilots around the country, the recommendation that we have is a request of $2 million that would really serve as turnkey, that would allow 2 different locations to be served with the pilot. We're targeting a minimum of 6 months operation, enough time to really gain some experience, get a lot of riders through the system to really gain that feedback in a meaningful way. So just in terms of roles and responsibilities, the idea here is that lead state agency is going to be the one that's actually defining the operating locations, identifying other agency partners, ultimately securing the pilot provider or multiple providers, depending on if there's 2 providers for the different locations, and then ultimately overseeing the pilot process. So with that would very likely be agency partners, a variety of them that would support that lead agency. So, imagine, a local municipality, a transit agency, even potentially a nonprofit that's that's involved in, helping to connect people to jobs. You can imagine a lot of different partnerships here that would really be, involved in helping to define that operating location, kind of coordinating those needs on the ground, and then really helping with local promotion of the pilot as well. In terms of industry partners, again, this turnkey approach has really pushed this to be where the industry partners are intended to really provide all of the heavy lifting, if you will, for the pilot, in terms of the planning, providing the vehicles, all of the technical and program support that they would execute as part of that partnership. So we touched on this a bit in terms of agency partners. I think a range of partnerships that would likely be involved in a successful pilot to just bring those, right perspectives and needs, kind of tactical on the ground needs to the table as part of that process. So in terms of the schedule, we're obviously, in front of you today presenting this and plan to, finalize and advance that recommendation to the legislature should you so choose, to be acted on in the 2023 legislative session. So that would be the opportunity to seek and secure that legislative support and funding. If that does proceed and does come through, then fall and summer, or summer and fall of next year, then really determining those partnerships, issuing a request for proposals to pilot providers, and ultimately securing the pilot providers, executing that over the course of 2024, and concluding likely in calendar year 2025 with a report of those findings to the governor and the legislature. So that's kind of how we see that, the timing of this process working out if you choose to advance this. So appreciate your attention, your input to this over the course of the last year as we've kind of developed this out further, and happy to entertain any questions. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. Questions or comments on this item?
Chair Restucci, this is Ted Bailey, WashDOT.
Yes.
From my 6 years of experience leading AV policy development and all the conversations, this is precisely the kind of next step that we need to take to inform all the things that Scott talked about, from both the cost profiles to potential partners to the logical use case that aligns with the use case that I saw this morning from FHWA that they're hopefully will publish early next year. And so from the perspective of something to do beyond wait for folks to come to us through self-certification, definitely a great next step. And I definitely would motion that we advance this recommendation for a pilot proposal.
Thank you, Ted. So we have a motion. Before we get into that, do you want to hold off on that and hear some more comments and questions before we make that motion?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Because I think we have a few more. Bryce Yaden, I see your hand is up.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. So just making sure I understand this as I look over the proposal again. The proposal is asking for $2 million to set up two different programs or routes or something along those lines. Is that correct?
Right. It's actually, it'd be one program, but we would have two different locations. So we'd have a small site,
so there would
small
be
city, municipality or area, and then a larger city, municipality or area. But it'd be one program funding those two locations.
Okay, but we're essentially asking for two routes, $2 million for two routes and getting the study, correct?
That's how I understand.
I'm oversimplifying. I just want to make sure that I just want to make sure that like that's what we're getting, right? Like that's the outcome at the end of the day is the data, the information, but then the on the ground stuff are two routes, one in an urban setting and one in a rural setting, correct?
Correct. That's what I understand. Scott,
Okay.
You can weigh in here.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And I think that we've been careful to wanting to characterize, I know you just said one urban, one rural. I think the idea behind this certainly is the technology we're talking about, has limited utility for very long distances. So we've talked a lot about kind of small cities and towns, really is kind of the target for that second route. As we think about that, just a bit of clarification there, but yes, two routes is the intention.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Bryce. Other questions or comments? We talked this to death, folks. Nobody else wants to talk about it. Michelle. Well, if I don't have any more conversation, I do have someone who wants to make a motion. So Ted, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner
Oh, I'm
Bodger.
sorry, Vice Chair Batra.
Yeah.
Yes, Shiv.
You'd given a price of $500,000 to $3 million. And with the program starting in 2023, with all the inflation and everything, what was the reason to pick only $2 million, not pick the upper limit?
The $3 million price tag was for a period of 3 years and for multiple vehicles running the route. So, you know, we use that as a data point to kind of understand, you know, kind of that pricing a little bit per year, recognizing that's not a perfect analogy, but I think we really wanted to bring this into you know, a reasonable number that was going to achieve the outcome that we were looking for without being a very long-term investment, a multiple vehicle investment per se. So we felt pretty comfortable that number was going to achieve that objective, just given the context of the other the pricing that we received.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Other question, or Scott, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, Ted, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Rasucci. So with that, I would like to motion that we advance the AV pilot proposal as described.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Representative Kloba. So it's been moved and seconded that we advance the AV proposal as presented. Debate or discussion on this item? I'm looking, I see no hands. So all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Chair Rasucci, it may be easier for us to count since we're not.
You want to do a roll call vote? That's fine. Go ahead and go do a roll call vote.
All right, please verbally say aye, nay, or abstain. So Chair Stucci,
Aye.
Vice Chair Batra,
Aye.
and I am going to skip folks that I know are not here. Representative Shelley Kloba,
Aye.
Dennis Bozeman representing WSP,
Aye.
Scott Kipper representing OIC,
Aye.
Teresa Burns, Bo Perschbacher representing DOL,
Aye.
Ted Bailey representing WashDOT,
Aye.
Debbie Driver, Debbie may have dropped off. Allison Drake representing LNI,
Aye.
Caitlin Jekyll representing ESD,
Aye.
Laura Johnson, Pam Hancock representing Traffic Safety Commission,
Aye.
Katie Ruckel representing WATEC,
Aye.
Kurt Augustine,
Abstain.
Bruce Agnew,
Aye.
Todd O'Brien,
Aye.
Brian Mistely,
Aye.
Kelly Just representing AAA,
Aye.
Bryce Yaden,
Abstain.
Katie Marshall for Ariel Wolf,
Abstain.
Steve Gordon, Brent Ludeman representing Waymo,
Abstain.
Anna Zebarts, well, Chair, for all those that voted, we have 15 ayes, 0 nays, 4 abstains. 79% of those that voted were ayes.
Okay, so in the opinion chair, the ayes have it. The motion passes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 7, 2022-2023 recommendations. Rima.
Thank you. Scott's going to do the heavy lifting, but just to give
Actually,
you.
Rima, if it's okay, I think Markel's going to do the heavy lifting for us today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Even better.
Even better. So just a quick little intro, and then I'll let Markel walk you guys through. But if you recall, since this group has been convening since 2018, there are about 16 recommendations that came forward to the Transportation Commission and then were ultimately advanced to the legislature and governor, and saw no further action. So we kind of thought, here we are nearing the end of the process, and it was a good time to resurrect the laundry list of recommendations that have been endorsed and advanced, to see if this group has any interest in re-upping, so to speak, any recommendations that you would like to have placed in the 2022-23 report to the legislature and governor. So with that, I'm going to let Markel walk you through what's left for your consideration.
Thank you, Rima. Markel?
So most of these should be pretty familiar to most of you folks, so we'll run through them hopefully pretty quickly. So starting back in 2018, when the work group was established, the University of Washington Law School came forward with a suite of initial recommendations that were initially requested for further evaluation because the work group had just started. But the actual recommendations brought forth in 2018 were preempting local regulation to prevent unnecessary roadblocks to deployment of autonomous vehicles, updating definitions, revising the RCW to accommodate those new technologies, establishing self-certification to promote innovation and freedom to develop new technologies, enhancing the infrastructure, encouraging local, state, and federal improvements in road systems and technologies to support AVs, and updating current data security laws, leading the pack in securing driver and user data. A lot of these probably sound familiar from further years because we have discussed these quite a bit in work group meetings throughout. So also in 2018, the Safety Committee brought forth a recommendation to conduct public education campaign. It was recommended to delay until further work could be done by the work group, which makes sense. Again, the work group was about 4 to 5 months old at the time. The Safety Committee also brought forth a recommendation to conduct a health impact assessment. It was endorsed by both the Executive Committee and the Transportation Commission. It was not furthered by the legislature and was discussed and recommended again in 2019, which I'll get to in just a second. Only that second's over. So Health and Equity in 2019, Health and Equity Subcommittee recommended again to conduct a health impact assessment of AVs. The Executive Committee took no voting action. The Transportation Commission did endorse, but with a caveat that they would like to reevaluate this in 2020, focusing more towards a structured public outreach campaign and collecting of testing location data. Also in 2019, the System Technology and Data Security Subcommittee recommended the adoption of AV privacy and data security principles and a data standard revision 0.01 or 0.1 developed by the subcommittee during 2019. That was heard by the Executive Committee, and they requested further explanation of best practices and standards of the industry throughout the nation, and the Transportation Commission agreed with that action. Moving into 2020, Safety Subcommittee recommended requirement for a law enforcement and first responder interaction guide. It was endorsed by both parties. It was originally included in Senate Bill 5460, but was removed when the substitute was introduced in March of 2021. The Licensing Committee recommended an amendment to RCW 46.92.010 to enable rulemaking by the Department of Licensing for the self-certification program. It was endorsed by both bodies. Again, originally included in Senate Bill 5460, but removed when the substitute was introduced. The Health and Equity Subcommittee recommended conducting structured public outreach, as we just discussed, as kind of a following of that health impact assessment, endorsed by both bodies, but no further action was taken. They also recommended identification of testing locations, endorsed by both bodies, but no further action was taken. The Infrastructure and Systems Subcommittee recommended increasing investment on enhanced roadway pavement markings endorsed by both bodies. No further action was taken. And support for the WashDOT's Work Zone Data Initiative endorsed by both bodies, but no further action was taken. And then one recommendation, which we just discussed, which was brought forth in 2021 to advance a state AV pilot program. Executive committee did not have the ability to act on this as this was brought forth by the Transportation Commission after the last meeting last year. So it is being brought forth for this meeting, which we just discussed, and the ayes have it. And it looks like it will be moving forward for action by the Transportation Commission. So that was a whole lot of information, hopefully not very new. But those were all the recommendations that have been unaddressed that have been brought forth through this body since its establishment in 2018.
Thank you, Marco. Questions or comments? Yes, Shiv.
I didn't have any comment. I just turned my.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes, Ted.
So just a clarification question. So it would seem logical that everything that was already endorsed by not only this committee, but also by the commission would be a natural recommitment to remind the legislature of what we've discussed so far. Is that fair?
I would agree. That's a fair assumption.
Okay.
Are there
Yes,
any
Bo.
recommendations that were already endorsed that folks would like to reevaluate the endorsement, or are we good with all the endorsements and can reestablish?
Well, I think one thing I'll say is, I know folks, when we got into legislative session on the rulemaking requirement for DOL, we did hear some industry concerns on that. So I don't think, from a DOL perspective, we're pushing that at this point if there are concerns. I just think, the frustration, of course, was that when we ran into the subcommittee, no one raised those concerns. So that was a tough time for that to come out rather than in the appropriate venue. But I know that there are, folks had some hesitation there. So we're fine not doing anything further on that recommendation at this point until, unless it's part of some other agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Bo. Bryce.
Thank you. And I don't think I have anything I don't think that there's another recommendation. I guess it's kind of a process question because Rima brought it up, I believe, at one point. We went through a bunch of the equity consideration stuff. There was a bunch of, potential either next steps. I don't think we have another meeting between now and then. I think this group continues to meet. We're not sunsetted, if I'm remembering correctly, because I just want to make sure either we find a path forward to, either do further review of those. If we need to put some level of endorsement in there, that would be great for that. I guess it's kind of a weird process question on timing because I don't want us to lose those. They did all this great work and they're very important. And I want to make sure that we pursue a number of those.
Thank you, Bryce. I would agree.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in just for a sec on that. We will include all of the running list of recommendations in the final report next year for sure. And Markel, correct me if I'm wrong, but every year we send over our annual report, we have a running list of this, which we certainly can include this year too, because the intention is not to have these disappear because they came up 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. So I think we will do our best to keep these in the report and in the front. And really today was just, if anybody has any strong feelings about any 1 or 2 or a small handful of these that you really want to have, I guess brought up as an actual recommendation for this year, rather than maybe as in a section that says, oh, and there's these other past recommendations. That would be good to know today. Otherwise, we'll just keep kind of putting these in the report as an FYI, if you will, so legislators in the governor's office can see them.
Okay. No, I think I'm okay. I mean, I think these are things that we've talked about a lot before. And we'll, go through it next year as well. So I appreciate the feedback. And obviously, there's going to be work outside of just this on these topics. So I think we're good. I was just making sure. I appreciate it.
No worries, Bryce. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Other questions or comments? Okay, so Markel, you posed a question was, does anyone want to remove an item or add an item? Is that what your question was?
Yeah, my question was for any of those that were fully endorsed by both the executive committee and the transportation commission. Is there anyone that would like to remove that endorsement? And I think the only comment we got was from Department of Licensing that they understand that, the discussion and the concern about the rulemaking, so they are not pushing forward for that to continue, at least for now.
Okay. Okay, other questions or comments on this item? Oh, yes, Laura.
Hey, yes, thanks. I apologize. I had to step away, and so I'm like just rejoining this conversation. I would of course really like to see the Health and Equity Subcommittee recommendations move forward and see some action there. I'm also wondering that, since that recommendation was made, the Healthy Environment for All Act passed, and whether and maybe I have not fully formed this thought, but if there's a thought around that structured public outreach, if there's a way of kind of tying that to the HEAL Act community engagement requirements, there's the ability to kind of opt in to that work. And so, whether that's done in a formal way or a less formal way, maybe that's a good, connection point.
Great comment. Yes. Rima, I see your head shaking. Do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, no, that's really a great idea, actually. And I think and I'm probably going to get the official name wrong, but the Social Justice Committee, the Department of Health and Commerce are, I think, leading, might be a really good forum to get this information to, as well as they kind of spearhead the HEAL Act implementation. And then I think if there's ever legislation or future legislation that more formally creates, for example, an AV program, or maybe it's within the current laws that passed in 2018, 2019. There could be references made there too, I think, for these expectations, right? Around public outreach. I mean, at the end of the day, it's got to be funded, and an agency's got to be, or agencies need to be directed. So I think there's lawmaking that is going to happen potentially if it's specific to AVs, but I think the HEAL Act implementation opportunity is a great forum it's on its way, that we could try to make them aware of this and see if they can carry some of this forward through their efforts.
Okay. Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing anything. Going once? Going twice? Okay, thank you everyone for your presentation, your items. Rima, do we have any items from executive committee members? Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? Not seeing or hearing anything. Oh, yes. Brent.
Thanks, Jim. So I just wanted to highlight that, Waymo was involved in wet weather testing here in Washington State a couple of years ago in the Kirkland area, and that, we suspended those operations during COVID. Some of you may have seen that we are restarting our wet weather testing up in Bellevue, and that those operations began a few weeks ago. So we've been working closely with the city. We talked to the Department of Licensing, let them know that we were intending to go ahead, and we are having conversations with our operations team about what sort of engagement we might be able to do with both the AV work group as well as the legislature moving forward. And so we'll be in contact further as we sort of formalize what we can and cannot do. But I just wanted to let everybody know that there is going to be some AV testing that we'll be doing over the course of the next few months, and then starting up again and running through, I think, the end of Q2 of next year.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate that. Other questions or comments? Okay, hearing, seeing none.
My apologies, Chair Rasucci. I know everybody's trying to get out of here. I just want to bring up one particular issue. I
Sure.
don't believe a company by the name of Halo has presented to this particular body, but I believe they presented to the Transportation Commission about their remote driving operation of a level 1 and 2 vehicle, which would fall out of the current purview of this group. But clearly, from at least from my estimation, there isn't a great governing process for a remote operation of a non-automated vehicle, right? To get your head around that. Think enterprise showing up at your house, and then you drive the car once it shows up, but it shows up with a remote driver bringing it to you. And so perhaps that's a topic for some discussion offline to figure out how to best have some discussion on that topic.
Oh, I would agree, Ted. As you know, the commission had quite a lengthy discussion on that and appreciated the presentation. So I would agree. Brett, you still have your hand up? You still wanted to speak?
No.
Oh,
Put it down.
okay, thank you. All right. Allison Drake, L&I.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a really quick update. The workforce subcommittee will be holding a meeting. We're anticipating by mid-November, possibly by late October, scheduled allowing to bring our business and labor stakeholders together. And that will be to discuss what the focus of our group is going to be in the coming months and to identify some next steps. So hopefully more to report back on next time this group convenes, but just to do some level setting on what our next step will be with our subcommittee.
Wonderful, thank you. Other questions, comments? Anything from exec committee members? Going once. Going twice. Okay. I know of no other business to come before the committee and would adjourn the meeting if there's no objection. Hearing, seeing no objection, so ordered. We are adjourned as of 2:13 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.